South Africa claims to be a modern democracy, yet it still bankrolls no less than 7 different kings. Behind the language of non-racialism and constitutional equality lies a state that selectively funds certain tribal authorities and purposefully excludes others, exposing a contradiction at the very heart of South Africa's collapsing political order. South Africa is a constitutional democracy, at least on paper. In reality, though, the country has been falling apart for quite some time, and there is virtually zero social cohesion to speak of. The country has always been a colonial construct, the product of an attempt to force together a host of peoples and races that in any kind of organic social order would have had their own homeland. Because of this immensely diverse melting pot, the Republic of South Africa, in addition to having a president and a democratically elected parliament, also has a whole host of traditional tribes and their leaders, including kings and queens who enjoy their positions by virtue of their heredity. These so-called traditional leaders are not only officially recognized by South Africa's constitution, but they also act as an advisory board to the government and are funded by the South African taxpayer, something which is not required by our constitution. A couple of weeks ago, the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa announced just how much these traditional leaders are getting paid by the South African government. The 7 officially recognized kings in this country each receive a salary of just over 1.3 million rands. For our international viewers, that amounts to around 80,000 US dollars for basically doing nothing. These 7 kings are the kings of the Zulu nation, the Amatembu tribe, and the king of the Amapimpondu tribe in the Eastern Cape. The Xhosa king, the Venda king, the Ndebele king, and the Bapedi king. Apart from these kings, principal traditional leaders receive almost as large a salary from the government. These traditional leaders cost the South African taxpayer in the hundreds of millions every year. And what is more, virtually none of the income taxpayers in this country live in any of these so-called traditional communities. This perhaps could have been excused if the tribal royals actually represented the people of this country, but they don't, because they can't. And because unlike the British people, for example, who have historically been united behind their monarch, the citizens of this country come from vastly different backgrounds, vastly different histories and lineages, and hold values that are fundamentally incompatible with one another. When describing the British national identity, Sir Roger Scruton in his 2004 book England and the Nations makes the following profound observation. The idea of a British national identity makes sense only because of the other and more deeply rooted identities that it subsumes. The Scots continue to describe themselves as Scots, the Irish as Irish, or if they rejected the Republic as Unionists, meaning adherence to the strange legal entity described in their passports, the Welsh, who provided us with our most determinedly English kings, the Tudors, are still in their own eyes just Welsh. The English remain English, and in their hearts it is England that secures their loyalty, not Scotland, Ireland or Wales. Here, Scruton highlights how the idea of a British national identity was enabled by various other identities that historically peacefully coexisted under the Crown and from which the Crown could demand some form of loyalty. In South Africa, this is profoundly just not the case. Here, the monarchies being recognized are funded by our government and have more often than not been a source of just conflict among the tribes, no sense of unity. Think of the mass genocides conducted by the Zulu people during the 19th century under the leadership of the Zulu monarch Shaka Ndingane, for example, and how much bloodshed and violence resulted from that. Think of the millions that were slaughtered by the imperial ambition of many of these tribal kings. Now contrast the millions of rands being spent on these traditional leaders who enjoy the ear of the South African government with a cultural community such as Orania, an Afrikaner community which also has its own representatives and authorities and local government structures, and yet none of which receive a dime from the South African state. Just imagine what Afrikaners could achieve had they enjoyed these same privileges that the other tribes in their tribal homelands do. Afrikaners and other whites in this country are being asked to pay millions of rands in taxes to fund these traditional leaders, and yet our own cultural communities and our own leaders do not enjoy any of the same privileges that even local headmen or headwomen of the most obscure tiny tribes in a location that no one has ever heard of do. This is, of course, because of the fact that the majority of voters in this country have consistently voted for political parties who frame their entire political narrative around liberating their constituency from some imaginary form of so-called white supremacy. Yet, what we really have in South Africa is not some imaginary form of white oppression, but a state that openly entrenches black tribal hierarchy while pretending to be non-racial. By selectively recognizing and funding ethnic authorities for some groups, but not others, the government deepens this resentment, undermines the constitutional equality, and accelerates the ongoing process of social fragmentation characterized by this country. Taxpayers are compelled to bankroll parallel power structures that neither represent them nor bind the nation together. Rather than fostering cohesion, this system rewards tribalism, entrenches historical grievances, and delegitimizes the state in the eyes of the excluded communities from these privileges. Of course, this is what happens when you try to force together dozens of different nations into one multicultural empire and under one government. Call that monstrosity a country, and then on top of all of that proceed to openly discriminate against the certain minority groups by attempting to exclude them from fruitful economic participation altogether. This is exactly why we here at the Willem Petsche Group have time and time again highlighted that ethnic self-determination is the only solution to the disaster that is the modern-day South African state. We firmly believe that everyone in this country, regardless of race or ethnicity or tribe, could benefit from their own self-rule. For more on this, check out our recent study on the 1994 Afrikaner Accord, where the ANC formally agreed to help facilitate the creation of an independent Afrikaner Republic. Check out the report by clicking on this link on your screen right now. And remember to consider supporting our work by becoming a paid member of the Willem Petsche Group. Simply follow these easy steps underneath me. It's the only way that we can continue making videos like this by your support. Goodbye and God bless.